Intelligent design is basically a scientific theory that says, hey, we recognize the effects of intelligent agents. There are intelligent agents out there. You are an intelligent agent, all right? And there are effects of intelligent agents that are different from non-conscious causal powers. That there is something distinctly recognizable about the effects of intelligence that cue you in to the inference that it was designed by a mind and not the product of unguided natural forces. And so, and that these principles can be actually scientifically tested with the normal tools of science, the empirical inquiry that science is all about. Whereas God, you cannot test God empirically, right? So this is the difference, you know, and this confusion is part of the reason why there's all this controversy about the issue of intelligent design. Intelligent design does not necessarily prove God's existence. It just says that there needs to be a mind in order for life to exist. The argument for intelligent design when it comes to cosmic fine-tuning, however, is very much more, implies more of a cosmic designer than the origin of life. So because of that, because the God question is really more of a metaphysical question, a study of philosophy, people object to the idea of talking about intelligent design inside of a science context. But remember, intelligent design doesn't make inferences about the designer. It doesn't say who the designer was. It just says we can recognize the effects of intelligence using these principles, and everywhere we go in the world we see when you find these particular things, it's always the product of a mind, every time. And you can go out and test it, prove it. You could disprove it. Show me it's falsifiable. You could potentially show, in theory, if there was an example of complex specified information that was the product of unguided natural forces, that would disprove the theory of intelligent design. So it's one of those, you can get your hands on it and really test it and prove it. For your first slide, it says define teleology and intelligent design. Well, teleology is the study of final causes, end goals, a purpose or intent. The key word there would be design. And that's why oftentimes the design argument is often called the teleological argument. So next slide. So I already talked about intelligent design and the definition of it. So skip on to the next part. Explain how intelligent design differs from creationism. I already covered that. Next slide. How do we know when something is designed? How do you know when something's designed? You know, right? How do I know that this backpack was designed and not the product of undirected natural forces? What do you guys think?
Because it's highly unlikely that it appeared right there out of nothing ending up being that.
Okay. Doesn't design kind of pop out as like the most likely explanation? Mm-hmm. Right? You know it when you see it, right? You know, so we want to kind of delve into what exactly is it that causes us to make those kind of inferences. There are lots of different things behind design reasoning, but I want to center in on one thing in particular, namely specified complexity. There's also irreducible complexity, which I probably won't even cover. But there's lots of things about this that would trigger our awareness of design. William Paley, basically, he made the observation of, you know, just if I walk out in the woods and I find a watch in the ground and it's functioning and there's gears, and it tells time. You know, this is not, there's really no way that you could say that that watch was the product of unguided natural forces. And that kind of, that William Paley's famous watch example is really, you know, intelligent design is like Paley's argument on steroids. It's, you know, really getting into the nuts and bolts about why it is I make that recognition when I pick up that watch and I look at it and I say, it's designed. So, you know, it's one of those things that, like, when we see design, we know our conclusions are correct, right? Even if something as simple as that water bottle, I know without a doubt, even if I've never seen a water bottle like that before in my life, it's the product of design. I mean, look at the way the cap goes on, and look at the letters and the pattern on the, you know, there is no way I could possibly fathom that it was the product of unguided natural forces. And it turns out that our cells and the way that life functions is infinitely more improbable than that being designed. You know, of not being designed, I mean. It is the greatest evidences of design on Earth. I mean, we have to be design engineers just to even understand how it works. We're still unraveling mysteries about the cell. I read an article recently that says the DNA might actually be multiple examples of layers upon layers of information. Like if you started reading a sentence starting at one word, it said a meaningful thing in English, and then you started at another word, it said a meaningful thing in Spanish, on top of each other. I don't know if that's true or not, but I recently read an article that they're studying this up at the University of Washington, and that might unravel some of the mysteries about, you know, how the cell functions and how cells know what to do. You know, so it's, you know, it's just unfathomable. It's unfathomable, and we'll talk more about it. So let's see. Okay. The key is figuring out what is it, you know, we make these design inferences all the time. What is it exactly that triggers in our brains the awareness of design? What specifically pulls that out and causes us to make that inference? So, next slide is define and explain specified complexity. Guys, this is a hard concept. You know, a lot of things we learn in this class is kind of hard. This is probably no exception. This is a hard one that takes even intelligent people that I know are very intelligent. When I explain this the first time, they don't get it. So hopefully you watch the videos and kind of were introduced to this and maybe had some questions, and I can kind of reinforce your prior knowledge of what specified complexity is. If you don't even remember the term, turn your brains on and tune in, because if you don't understand this, you won't understand the rest of the video. And it's a hard thing to understand. So, specified complexity. It's basically, the term is comprised of two words, specificity and complexity. So, it's when you put those two things together that it triggers the awareness of design. So, specificity, when we talk about specificity, really what we mean is we're talking about an independently given pattern. A pattern is, you know, see, each one of these by themselves is not enough to trigger the awareness of design. When you see a pattern, just because you see a pattern doesn't mean it was designed, right? You can look at, for example, salt crystals. There's a chemical pattern, NaCl, NaCl, NaCl. It's a pattern it's specified. Snowflakes have a pattern, right? Very cool pattern, actually. When you really look at snowflakes, they're amazing. The more you study them, they're even more amazing. There's a pattern. But there's no design. I mean, it's not like, you know, somebody is it's not, they aren't the product of intelligent design. You wouldn't make a design inference with a snowflake. Chemical compounds, you could see, you get, you know, these large chemical compounds, and there's patterns associated with how they work, how chemical bonds are taking place. There's all sorts of patterns associated with the mechanism of chemistry, where you have a great deal of specificity. But what you don't have is a large degree of complexity. You'll have some complexity, but not a large degree of complexity. So the next thing is complexity. So first thing is specificity. It's specified. There's a pattern. Basically, when you think specificity, think pattern. Okay? So for example, on my cup, it says frosted lemonade. There's a pattern there. Right? You guys recognize the characters in this this wording? It's because you have a preconceived notion of what an F sounds like. And when you put together F-R-O-S-T-E-D, it spells the word frosted. And you know what frosted, that sound that comes out, frosted, it's associated with a concept that you have prior knowledge of. Right? So it's very specified. Language is extremely specified. Okay? So, any questions about specificity? No. Okay. Complexity now. So remember, specified complexity has two components, specificity and complexity. We just explained specificity. Now we're going to talk about complexity. When you think complexity, think improbable. It's they're basically synonymous. Again, complexity or improbability by themselves is not enough to infer design, because improbable events happen all the time. Such as winning the lottery. You win the Mega Millions or the big, what's the big one called? The Powerball. Yeah, you win the Powerball. It is highly improbable that you would win that, right? So you go out, but okay, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So improbability by itself is not enough to infer design, okay? But you know, think about anything. Even when it comes to the arrangement of pepperonis and what do we got? Oop, I'm caught on you, your chair. You know, this, well, you know what, I have a slice of pizza over here. You know, there's a certain placement of the cheese, right? You know, notice there's like a little splat and it's burnt right here. There's an arrangement of this, right? And there's a lot of different possible arrangements. The probability of getting a slice that's arranged exactly like this is low, right? Exactly, with that little burnt piece of bacon right there, and it comes up at a little point. So, when you think of specificity, also include in your mind, the amount of possible arrangements of different things, like a hillside, for example. A hillside, there's lots of different ways that the hillside could have occurred. And if you see a hillside in your town, it's very unlikely that you're going to find one that looks exactly the same with all the little crevices and creeks and gopher holes and whatnot, right? So that's part of understanding what I mean by complexity. Okay, so we've talked about specificity and complexity. Put the two together. What if you won the lottery, but there was a pattern associated with you winning the lottery?
Every Friday.
Yeah, what if you won every Friday?
Great.
Do you think that the FBI would start making design inferences?
Yes,
Why?
they are cheating.
You've rigged the game, right? You've designed it in such a way that it's no longer random because it's now, there's a pattern associated combined with the improbability. That would trigger the awareness of design. What about well, let me just finish. I got lots of examples, and we'll keep going through. But so specified complexity is when you put the two together, when something is both specified and complex at the same time. It's specified in that it matches an independently given pattern. It's complex in that it's improbable, unlikely to be repeated. So the higher degree of those two, if you have a great deal of complexity and a great deal of specificity, the greater the degree of each, the greater degree of your certainty that it was designed, right? You make design inferences all the time. Sometimes you're more certain than others, right? And when you have a high degree of specificity and a high degree of complexity, you have a high degree of certainty that your design inference is valid. So basically, you can think of specified complexity. One way to think of specified complexity is information. Information. Basically, and there's different types of information. In the video, Stephen Meyer talked about Shannon information as being inversely proportional to uncertainty. That basically information involves the reduction of uncertainty. So remember he said, I predict it's going to rain in January. All right, that's it's got a high degree. It's got a think about that statement in terms of its degrees of complexity and specificity. January's a decent part of the month. It usually rains in January. It's kind of it's not a
It's not that complex.
it's not a really meaning. It's meaningful, but it's not as specified, right? But what if I said I predict? What if you said I predict that on September 2? What if 20 years ago I said I predict that on September 11th, 2001. 2 planes will be flown into the Twin Towers. Right? That's a lot more specified and a lot more improbable, right? So if I were to make that statement, I would be all over the news, when it actually happened, right? One of the things Stephen Meyer did in the video, is he handed around a bike lock. Do you guys remember that? Remember that? Yeah, he opened it up and he said, hey, first what he did is he talked about the probability of getting a bike lock correct. And it's like 1 in 60. You have each code, it's a probability of 1 in 60, but you got to do it, 3 times, so 60 times 60 times 60. And it came out to some astronomical number, and people were like, yeah. And then he starts going around and he said, here, try to open it. And people are like, okay. Well, no, pass it to the next person. And they're like, what are you doing? This is stupid. Pass it to the next person. And then he gets to like the 3rd or 4th guy, and he opens it, and they all go, what? No. At first, the first thing was, no, that's crazy. And then they're like, no way, right? And what was the basis for them making the inference? They're making a design inference when they say no way. Like, it wasn't random. They're accusing him of rigging the deal, right? It's not an undirected random event. This is the product of design, right? He opened that by design, not by chance, right? And that was the inference. And then he confessed, yeah, you're right. I did it, but the point of doing that was to show that when you have a highly improbable event that's specified, it triggers the awareness of design. It's not just the improbable. See, this is the thing. It's because it's kind of confusing, it gets distorted when people talk about it, particularly when you talk about it, people in the news or journalists talk about it. It just kind of, one of those things, I can't even handle watching a news story that covers the topic because it's just, there's so much distortion involved related to the philosophy of science and related to explaining what intelligent design is even saying. And the typical thing is they say, oh, it's just so complex that it couldn't have happened by chance. We're not just saying that. It's not just complexity, it's that it's specified. There's a pattern. It's the combination of the two that triggers the awareness of design, not just the improbability alone, because improbable things happen all the time. It's the combination of a specified pattern with an improbable arrangement that triggers the awareness of design. And again, the higher degree of each, the higher degree of certainty we have related to our design inference. Yeah. Design is actually the opposite of chance. So, yeah. Okay, your slide, I'm going to ask you to use 4 examples, and I say non-controversial examples, meaning don't talk about design, just talk about where we would use it in everyday life. Examples of how specified complexity is used as a basis for recognizing the effects of an intelligent agent. So you want to think of some examples of specified complexity. One example is we go out to somewhere in Santa Barbara, some hotel, and in the flowers it's written with flowers, "Welcome to Santa Barbara." Right? It's in the flower pot, a flower garden. Right? You've got flowers that spell out "Welcome to Santa Barbara." Is it possible? And we talk about possible, not probable. Possible. Is it possible that when they were randomly throwing the seeds that it went and spelled out that pattern? Yes, it's possible, but it's extremely unlikely, right? The arrangement is highly improbable, but it's not probability alone that's enough to trigger the awareness of design, because again, improbable things happen all the time. Very improbable things happen. In fact, everything, including the arrangement of the pepperonis and bacon on this pizza, is improbable. It's improbable that it would have landed right on the C. This little piece of bacon would have landed right on the C of my cup, right? It could have landed a lot of different other places, right? So probability by itself is not enough to trigger the awareness of design. But that "Welcome to Santa Barbara" matches an independently given pattern. We understand the characters of each letter. We understand what those symbols are tokens for in terms of the phonemic sounds they're associated with. And we know when they combine, they make a word, and the meaning of the sound of that word is associated with a concept that we've already pre-planned and we've already have a preconceived idea about. So the fact that it's both specified, but it also matches this independently given pattern, triggers the no-duh awareness of design, right? So another example, and the classic example that is used by design theorists is Mount Rushmore. What is it about Mount Rushmore that would trigger the awareness of design? There's faces, so you don't typically see the patterns that match the patterns of faces on mountains, right? Could they have happened? Impossible, yes, possible, right? And you might, find, when you drive down on Gaviota, when you're going south on Gaviota through the Gaviota tunnels, On the right-hand side, there's like a mountain. It kind of looks like the Easter Island. I always point it out, like the Easter Island face. It looks like, it kind of looks like a face, right? So maybe there is like some kind of a, pattern that's kind of, face-ish in mountains, right? But it's more than just faces. What else is it that would trigger the awareness of design?
Four recognizable faces.
Four recognizable faces. So we're ratcheting up the specificity. And what are those four recognizable faces? They're presidents, right? They all happen to be faces of recognizable presidents. And it's not just one, it's the fact that there's four separate presidents. That's another layer of specificity. And we can go on and on and on. I could take out my dollar bill and I see the patterns that are associated with the face of George Washington match the patterns on the hillside. And the more we ratchet up the layers of specificity and the complexity, it's the combination of the two that triggers the awareness of design. How about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence? You guys ever seen the movie Contact? It's a good movie. I love that movie. Anybody else see it? Oh, guys, come on. You gotta, I'm getting goosebumps. That was a good movie. Except for it's,
like the 90s.
yeah, it's like, yeah, it is from the 90s. You guys are a little young. Well, okay,
From the 90s.
so it's actually based by a book that was written by Carl Sagan, the famous naturalist who made those videos, the Cosmos series that are even still today showed in science classes. So Carl Sagan wrote this book about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Basically, the way the movie works is there's this woman by the name of Jodie Foster. She plays the lady who is an employee of SETI, which was recently defunded, I think back in 2010 or something. But we were funding billions of dollars in people looking at the stars, pointing all these satellites at different galaxies in the search for extraterrestrial life. And what were we searching for? A message, an information-bearing signal, right? Because the thought that, okay, let me get ahead. I don't want to get ahead. I want to describe the movie. Okay, so Jodie Foster, she's working for SETI. They're looking for a signal, and she's like just chilling on the roof of her. She has her emotional dramas with people. And then, so she's just like listening to the sounds on her little computer on the hood of her car, moving these satellites, and then all of a sudden she hears this womp, 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 womp. Prime numbers. She recognizes, first off, this is a weird sound. Is it just, and then they start analyzing, oh my goodness. It's 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and it goes on, and they're all now goosebumps. Oh my gosh, we have a signal that it's based in mathematics. That alone was enough to trigger the awareness of design. And it would, if we found a signal if we found an information-bearing signal from another planet in another solar system or galaxy, that would be proof of intelligent design. Now, in the movie, they analyze the sound and determine that there's a three-dimensional pattern to the sound, and it turns out that the patterns are an instruction manual on how to build an interdimensional portal. And then they build the portal, and they go see the aliens, and the aliens created us, and then their message is that it got real new agey at the end, we one with the universe, But guys, this story is not really far off from what we see in life, because all life is the result of a message written in adenosine, thymine, guanine, and ACT,
HEC.
yeah,
Guan.
cytosine. The 4 nucleotide bases, the letters of the DNA code. If you get, and basically, it's like a binary digits on a computer code. That result, it's a what you would call an abstract form that results in the physical 3-dimensional form of you and all life. It's all written in this code. So it's it's a very good analogy for intelligent design because it's basically the same, arguing the same thing. So, okay, I got to get through these examples. So imagine you go out, you wake up in the morning, you come downstairs, and you see the alphabet cereal has been knocked over, right? And it's spilled out on the table. But then when you look at the way the letters in the alphabet cereal is spelled out, it says, "Take out the trash, Mom." Would you make an inference? Would you make a design inference? Of course you would, right? Because it's highly specified, right? And highly improbable. It's the combination of the two that would trigger your awareness of design. The bike lock example, winning the lottery 10 times in a row. Do you think the detectives would make an inference after about number 2 or number 3? Definitely by number 3. Number 4, they're just putting you in a hole. They're not going to let you even look at lotto, right? And it doesn't matter they're going to figure it out because they know there's no way that you would win it multiple times in a row like that. A card dealer who gets a perfect hand every time. Okay, so guys, copyright law. When you make copyright law, you're inferring that that when somebody has the same thing as you, that they've infringed on your intellectual property, right? How detectives solve crimes? What do detectives look for? They look for patterns, right? Hey, this person saw this car at this period of time, and that car happened to be in the same area. Oh, the guy driving the car had red hair. Well, hey, the criminal had red hair. And the more specified they can get, the more, oh, the guy had a tattoo of "I love Jesse" on his left chest, And, now we found this guy who has a tattoo that says "I love Jesse" on his, the left side of his chest. The more specified you have, the more specified the pattern is, the more certain you are with your design inference, right? That's how detectives solve crimes. Plagiarism, how plagiarism is detected. They have machines that look for patterns, right? They look for, they look for ideas that are found elsewhere, and they find those same patterns in your paper, and that causes you to get busted. And nowadays, when you submit things electronically, there are actually ways that teachers can search your, they submit all their papers onto a website, and the website checks to see if you're cheating. Yeah, they really do that now. Yeah, I had some teachers who you had to submit your essay via a certain website when you submitted the essay. Again, same concept. What about answering prayers? Can any of you guys think of a good example of an answered prayer? Can you guys think of one? You don't have to share it, but just think in your head. Or think in your head, what would be a good example of an answered prayer?
Something you need at a specific time.
Okay. What if I said, God, I pray that the sun rises tomorrow? And then, God answered my prayers. The sun rose. God exists, right? You know, what's wrong with why is that not a good, it's not very specific, right? Right. It's not very specific and it's very probable. So again, it's the combination of the two. So if I'm praying very specifically for this specific thing, and then it happens, you know, then the more specific I am, and the more improbable of that happening it is, the more justified I am in presuming that it was an answer from God, right? And that's, you know, yeah. So, you know, guys, think of examples of your own. You know, you could be creative with this one when you do your slides. And I know Chris will come up with something creative on his own. But, you know, think of examples of where specified complexity would trigger the awareness of design. So, now that is there any question about where I'm at so far? No? We all feel pretty good? You want me to cover anything? Any questions at all? Okay. So now we want to move into examples of specified complexity where we would see that in nature. So basically, in nature you have the fine-tuning of the universe and you have the information in DNA. Those are the two clearest examples of specified complexity happening in nature. Yes?
I have a question, sorry. Is the concept of specified complexity something that transcends, like, this study of apologetics? Like, can it be applied to, is it applied to science? Like you mentioned.
Well, yeah, it would be. I mean, yeah, I mean.
Is that the same as the show? No, I don't watch the show.
No, that's complex specified information.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, the idea of information theory is you know, that's what the argument. That's why people who, you know, proponents of intelligent design throw their hands up and like, we use this stuff every day. You know, this is part of our everyday experience.
So yes.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think they determine who's plagiarized the paper? You know, it's specified complexity. That's where, you know, I mean, again, it's the higher degree of specificity and the higher degree of complexity, the higher degree of certainty it was designed. Can you ever be certain, though? You can't be certain about any scientific question. That's not, science doesn't yield certainty the way that logic does. It's always a probabilistic conclusion. Even the probability, the likelihood that this is going to fall, I cannot be 100% certain because I don't know what the future holds, right? I know that every time I've ever done it, it falls, but maybe the next time I do it, it doesn't fall, you know? Science only yields probability. Empirical inquiry only yields probability. You can look for patterns, you look, and the stronger the patterns are, the more certain you are with your conclusions. But, so, when it comes to specified complexity in nature, you're looking at the fine-tuning of the universe, and you're looking at information in DNA. So, first step in your homework is to make the case for intelligent design from cosmic fine-tuning. Explain how fine-tuning is an example of specified complexity. So, anthropic fine-tuning is basically there within the universe. There are all sorts of things that need to be in place, have to, in order for life to be possible. There are lots of multiple different things, and you know, I have a list of factors that I stole from Francis Collins, I believe. He said, or is it John Collins? I forget. It might be Francis Collins. I forget his name. Strong nuclear force, constant, weak nuclear force constant, gravitational force, electromagnetic force, ratio of electromagnetic force to gravitational force constant, it goes on and on and on. Ratio, like the ratio of an electron mass to a proton mass, the number of protons to electrons, the expansion rate of the universe, that's a big one, the expansion rate of the universe, entropy level in the universe, it goes on and on and on and on. There are all these things that if they were changed even like a minutia, life would be impossible. And again, like the bike lock, you have like a 1 in 60 chance plus a 1 in 60 chance plus it causes the trigger the awareness of design. In this case, we're saying 1 in 106, like 1 in, I mean, I'm just throwing some random numbers, but this is like, we're talking like 1 in 10 to the 256th power times 1 in 10 to the 78th power times 1. I mean, we're like each one of these is like this. And to give you an idea of how big these numbers are, there's only been 1 in 10 to the 18th seconds since the universe began, if it began 15 billion years ago or 20 billion years ago. So these numbers are astronomically huge. And each one of them individually has to be fine-tuned a very specific way, or else life is impossible. So I've got a video that will help kind of explain what I'm talking about, and it'll just focus on a couple of the things.
Since the beginning of time, all the matter in the universe has been governed by precisely balanced laws and constants. During an interview with Robin Collins, a philosopher with degrees in mathematics and physics, Strobel learned how these laws offer compelling evidence for a creator and conspire to make the universe habitable for life.
The laws of physics are balanced on a razor's edge for life to occur. For example, if you didn't have something like gravity that pulled matter together, you would never get planets, you wouldn't get stars, you wouldn't get any complex organisms. If you didn't have the strong nuclear force, there would be nothing to hold protons and neutrons together in the nucleus. And so you wouldn't have any atoms, so no chemistry. If you didn't have the electromagnetic force, you would have no bonding between chemicals. You would have no light, and the list goes on. So you need all these sorts of fundamental principles have to be in place in order for life to occur. Wipe out one of those principles, wipe out one of those laws, no life.
Strobel learned that life also hinges on the precise strengths and relative values of many different physical constants. One example of this fine-tuning is the force of gravity.
Imagine a ruler divided up into 1-inch increments and then stretched across the entire universe, a distance of some 14 billion light years. For the purposes of illustration, the ruler represents the possible range for gravity. In other words, the setting for the strength of gravity could have been anywhere along the ruler, but it just happens to be situated in exactly the right place so that life is possible. Now, if you were to change the force of gravity by moving the setting just 1 inch compared to the entire width of the universe, the effect on life would be catastrophic.
No large-scale life forms could exist. Anything that was more than the size of a pea would be completely crushed. So you might be able to get life of a very, very primitive sort, such as bacteria, but you could never get conscious observers.
The strength of gravity is just one of at least 30 separate parameters that must be finely tuned to produce a life-sustaining universe. Another example is the cosmological constant.
The cosmological constant describes the expansion speed of space in the universe. If space expands too quickly, then the universe will spread out so quickly that material objects can't form. So you can't get stars and galaxies and planets and the types of things that we, of course, take for granted in our universe.
physicists have determined that the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 part in 100 million billion 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 billion. Such precision has been compared to traveling hundreds of miles into space, then throwing a dart at the Earth and hitting a bullseye measuring 1/trillionth of an inch in diameter, an area less than the width of a single atom.
Just consider those two parameters, gravity and the cosmological constant. Their level of fine-tuning is to a precision of 1 part in 100 million trillion 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 trillion. I mean, that's like 1 atom in the entire known universe.
This fine-tuning is also evident at the atomic level. The strong nuclear force binds atoms together. If the strength of this force were to decrease by 1 part in 10,000 billion 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 billion, the only element left in the universe would be hydrogen. Again, chemical life would not be possible.
There are multiple layers of parameters that are required in order for life to even be possible, in order for you to have life-sustaining planets, in order for you to have the type of system that we have in place. You could not do it if one of those things, such as the force of gravity, which by itself is astronomically, the probability of it landing exactly where it did is astronomically small, but that's just one. And you have the multiple ones, one after another, after another, after another. It is one of those things that it's so much that people among physicists, they call it anthropic fine-tuning, because the word anthro means man. Anthropic, it's fine-tuned for man. And so while we may not be the center of the universe, it does seem as though we are the center in terms of importance, that the whole universe seems to be fine-tuned for life to be possible, life-permitting planets to be possible. And then there's this whole thing related to the ability for there to be a life-sustaining planet. And there's this whole, there's a book out there called Privileged Planet by Jay Richards and Emilio Gonzalez that talk about all of the factors that would be associated with there being a life-sustaining planet. Emilio Gonzalez was one of those guys featured on the movie Expelled. He worked, I think, for, I forget what university he worked for, or works for. He was searching for planets, life-sustaining planets. He discovered several planets, and he was basing this, based this book on this idea that we live in a very rare situation here on Earth that we don't really find anywhere else in the universe. And when you're searching for life, you're looking for certain factors, and we just happen to have all of the great factors that would allow a life-sustaining planet. So there's the fine-tuning of the universe, the initial constants and quantities that allow for life at the beginning of the universe, but there's also the fine-tuning of Earth. But it's the ones that have to do with the universe that are so infinitely specific. Very, very, very specific. It has to be a certain way, one after another, after another, after another, after another. And again, it's just like the bike lock. Each one of them is like, the thing in the bike lock. And so the more specified, the more complex, the stronger our awareness of design is. And certain guys like William Lane Craig will only use this argument. William Lane Craig does not talk about intelligent design as it relates to biological information, simply because it's more controversial. This argument stems out of the mainstream science. God is a much more favorable topic among physicists than he is among biologists. And you will find that they're much more open when people who study this and understand this anthropic fine-tuning know that the view of there being a creator, or the view of this being design, flows from the mainstream, whereas when you're talking biology, you're up against the mainstream. And when you talk to serious atheists, a lot of times a good question to ask an atheist is, well, what's the best argument you've ever encountered for God's existence? And both Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens has said it's this one. This is the one they don't know what to say about. It's a very strong argument, but the arguments against it are very complex. So if you ever watch a debate on this topic, it's just people are what they're saying, flying way over your head. I watched a debate with William Lane Craig and a guy from MIT last year, and I could not understand what they were talking about. It was just, so just be aware that there's a back and forth that goes, so don't just assume that there isn't a response. There's always a response, and sometimes the responses get extremely technical. So you want to get confused, start watching answering objections to the arguments against the cosmic fine-tuning, and you'll quickly find yourself over your head in terms of science. But it's still a very strong argument. It's a very, very, very strong argument. Yeah.
Considering it, like, it could, if you have all eternity to roll the cosmological dice.
Okay. No, I get you. Well,
then basically, from a mathematical standpoint at least, you will have a 100% insurance that you will have a universe like this.
right. Okay. So if you have an infinite number of time and an infinite number of galaxies, but we don't. We've got a finite number of time and a finite number of galaxies, which has caused people who are proponents of naturalism to have to retreat to other universes. And there's a lot of talk about instead of it being a universe, it's actually a multiverse, an infinite number of potential universes. And that they imagine there being some machine that just pops out universes. And but in response to your question, I have a video because I was prepared for that one, and you're gonna like it. So this is okay. So this is William Lane Craig's responsibility. So people who appeal to an infinite number of you appeal to the universe to expanding their probabilistic resources to infinity. Here's the response. It's kind of this is a good one. This is one of the ones that I. This was actually in a video. This was impromptu in a Q&A. He just it's brilliant.
If you're willing to inflate your probabilistic resources to render anything improbable, because in an infinite ensemble of worlds anything will happen, then couldn't you just explain anything and everything by chance, which would render rational behavior impossible? For example, imagine the following dialogue taking place in a West Texas saloon between two fellas, Tex and Slim. Tex, you're a dirty, cheating skunk. Every time you deal, you get 4 aces. Well, Slim, I knows that every time I deals, I gets 4 aces. But you got to understand that in this here multiverse of ours, the poker games like this are going on everywhere. And so, given infinite chances, odds are that in some of them, I gets 4 aces every time I deals. So, put up that shooting iron and shut your yap and deal.
Yeah, I don't know what this one's all about. Okay. All right. Okay, that's enough. Stop. Okay.
But the thing is, you're only outside of our universe, you have unlimited time.
No, that's not true. Outside of the universe, you have no time.
Yeah, you're outside of time.
Right.
So, basically you have. Okay, so there's no change. Okay. Yeah, okay. There's no change outside of universe, so it's like.
yeah, it's
You could not even throw the dice.
right. Yeah, where would you get the dice too?
No,
Right.
it's gifted, but you could not, if it was there, you could not even throw it.
Right, because
like,
it's not
because
changing.
there's no
Right,
chance.
right. No change outside of time.
Shoot.
So this one goes. Yeah.
I like the answer.
Okay. So again, so basically the way William Lane Craig, I said William Lane Craig likes this argument better than the design argument from biological information. And he phrases it this way in all of his debates. He says, the fine-tuning of the universe is either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. Can you think of a third option? The fine-tuning of the universe is either due to physical necessity, meaning physics and chemistry caused it to be the way it is, chance, probability, or design. Okay? So that's the first premise. It is not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it is due to design. And so, looking at the not due to physical necessity or chance, there's nothing about the constants and quantities in physics that determine their value. There's no physical necessity as to why the force of gravity is exactly what it is, or why the expansion rate of the universe is exactly the way it is. But it has to be fine-tuned exactly like that, or else you would not have a life-permitting universe. And so it's not an issue of physical necessity. It's also not an issue of chance because of the astronomical improbability. I mean, we talk about this design related to life, and that's really, 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 really improbable. This is like a whole nother ballgame of improbability when you talk about, literally astronomical, astronomical improbability. So the counter argument is the multiverse. People expand their probabilistic resources, making it more likely that a life-permitting universe could occur. Response is that there is limited evidence for a multiverse, although some people are now saying that there is, and again, this goes beyond my head. But number two is that it's very improbable that for every improbable thing that would be, and any improbable thing would be probable given an infinite ensemble which would render rational inferences based on probability impossible. If it's possible, it's probable in a universe. So if it's possible, it would then become probable. And it would make rational inferences related to probability impossible. So, yeah. Next one. Argue for intelligent design. So we're shifting now. We were talking about the cosmos. Now we're talking about life, the origin of life. Make the case that intelligent design make the case for intelligent design from biological information in life. Explain the processes by which DNA codes for proteins and show how impressive the information processing system in DNA is. Guys, DNA is so amazing. It's incredible. I have part of my background is I went to study to become a nurse. I used to work with kids with special needs at Devereux, and I was talking with one of the psychologists there. I'm like, I really want to keep working with these guys. I like the field. I want to keep doing this. He said, why don't you get into nursing? We always need nurses who can handle our kids, who know how to to deal with it. And you'll make a lot of money, and it's really only a few years of school. I think if you want to live in Santa Barbara, become a nurse. So I went on to study nursing, and so the prerequisites for nursing is biochemistry and anatomy and physiology and microbiology and and then when you get into the nursing program, you start learning pharmacology and pathophysiology. I was actually in a nursing program, and I failed a clinical because I got called out of the room by my supervisor and left the bed rail down, and was endangering my client, and so I would have had to start a year ahead, and I was already just not doing, I was doing well in the science, but not in the hospital. And so I just didn't have the multitasking, short-term memory skills needed to be a good nurse, and I just kind of came to, it was a real, it was a major life-shattering moment in my life. But that to say, I have God gave me this whole background with the ability to talk meaningfully about this subject. And so, some of this stuff is straight out of my textbooks. If you look at this was straight out of my my microbiology textbook. And so it's just, the more you know about it, the more incredible it is. And let me just say that. So going back to argue for intelligent design from biological information in life. Okay, I already read that. Okay, so gene expression. My microbiology teacher called gene expression the central dogma of all biology. He said he called it the central dogma because it's our fundamental view of how life works on Earth. Is this idea of gene expression. Basically, information is stored in your DNA. That's called your genome. It's basically like the blueprint for life. It's written in the abstract form, right? And then information is transmitted through the DNA, through RNA, stored in DNA, information. The DNA is copied into the form of RNA, and that's transmitted, and RNA is then translated through a sequencing of amino acids. So basically, the information from RNA is used to sequence amino acids, and the sequencing of amino acids goes to build proteins. Now, you need a correctly sequenced chain of amino acids in order for them to fold up and actually form a protein. So when you have a protein, that is called your phenotype. So that's like the actual building, or the building blocks of the building. Okay, so it starts out in an abstract non-physical form. The information in DNA, it's in the mind. When I say abstract, I mean even though it's stored in the protein of DNA, it's in an abstract form. And when I say abstract, I mean non-physical. It's in the idea realm. It's in the realm of idea. When it's in the the genotype is an abstract idea form of life, and then when you have a protein, that's the physical form of life. That's the phenotype. So that's the difference between genotype and phenotype. Almost everything in the cell is made up of proteins, and every living thing is made up of cells. So proteins are pretty much everything in life. You are a bunch of proteins. And so here's some kind of key terms, basic anatomy of the cell. You will learn this in junior high. Trust me, I teach junior high. You learn this in junior high. You may have forgotten it, but I know you learn it in junior high because I have to help my kids with their science tests in II class, and they're studying this stuff. And so all these terms are in 7th and 8th grade life science. So, okay, a nucleotide, it's one of the bases that is used in DNA. DNA is basically within the double helix. It's made up of nucleotides in the center. And it's those nucleotides that are used to code for proteins. So think of DNA. You guys know about binary digits in a computer code? Some of you are shaking your head, some of you are like... You know that everything that's showing up on your computer screen is the result of ones and zeros? Ones and zeros, everybody? So some of you guys know, some of you guys don't? Okay, so computer codes is basically all computer codes. It's ones and zeros. Ones and zeros, ones and zeros.
That was HTML. I don't know, I might be way off.
Ones and zeros.
Okay.
Computer codes, ones and zeros. Yeah. Yeah,
When
everything.
it comes down to like, because you can only make with the transistors, you can only make 1 and 0. So if you have like a billion transistors and IC or whatever.
But when it comes down to it, everything that shows up in the code, it's ultimately ones and zeros. So if you can think of a nucleotide basis as like the ones and zeros of the computer code. Now, a sequence of 3 nucleotide bases is called a codon. And those codons will code for protein, or code for amino acids. All right, so you need a 3-letter sequence of amino acids, or not amino acids, nucleotide bases. So if you look on the second page, this is the genetic code. This is how life works. There are 4 different letters, the A, C, T, and G in DNA, and those are all the possible ways that you could have the A, C, T, and G combined. And they will code for different amino acids when the DNA is used to make proteins. So
What do you mean code for? I keep hearing this one code for.
code
What
for.
does that mean, code for?
Well, it's basically when we say, when there are 3 nucleotide bases, and when you have them in that sequence, it means when the ribosomes start putting together proteins, it's going to take a specific amino acid based upon the sequence of those 3 nucleotide bases. Okay? And it's going to say, okay, well then we'll use this amino acid. And then another sequence comes by, okay, I'll use this amino acid. And then you have to have the right sequence of nucleotide bases in order to get the correct protein, or the correct amino acid. And then the amino acids are like building blocks. It's sort of like I was building Legos with my nephew this weekend. He has a really cool Lego set. It was like the Lego set was connected to the video game. So if you built the Legos and you put it on the thing, like if it was built right, it was connected to the video game. And if you beat certain levels, you would get instructions on how to build other Lego things. Yeah, no, it was cool, right? So think of like the code, the DNA, like the instructions, and say, okay, now you need 4 of these blue pieces that have the little slant on them, and you need 6 of these little, the square blocks, and then you have so you got to have the right sequencing in order to build the thing, So the nucleotide bases code for the sequencing of the nucleotide bases, code for the amino acids. The order of the amino acids will allow this thing to fold up into a functional protein. And I'll show you a video that will hopefully help you understand. I really got to race through this stuff because we got too much stuff to go through. So basically,
Quick question.
yeah.
You said ACTG, but this only has ACG really.
Okay, well, this has to do with RNA. RNA switches out thymine for urine or whatever. So look, if you look at the next page, you see how the first one is it says DNA, and you got A, C, T's, and G's in that little strip. You get that? Mm-hmm. And then the next strip, that's RNA. RNA is a copy of DNA. So and then that's where every T is now a G. And then you have to have that right sequence that will sequence the right amino acids. Okay? So, okay. Again, they teach this in junior high. I know it's complex, but really, they do. They teach it in junior high. So again, amino acids are so think of amino acids as like building blocks that build proteins, and proteins are the building blocks. There are several layers of building blocks. You know, you have at the most basic abstract realm, you have the A, C, T's, and G's in DNA, and that's copied and translated to the sequencing of the right amino acids, and then once the amino acids are folded up, they make proteins, and then the proteins work together to make the cells. The cell is made up of thousands of proteins. Okay, so again, a gene is a DNA that a segment of DNA that contains information needed to build a protein. So that's a gene is a specific segment of the DNA that will build a protein. And then the genetic code is the system by which nucleotide sequences are used to build amino acid sequences. They are used to specify amino acids from gene sequences. Again, so this process, what's going on, guys? What's so funny? You what? Oh, okay. Okay, so the process is sequence specific. You have to have it in the right order or else you don't have a functional protein. Again, there's this predetermined, just like with Pierre, this water bottle. It says Perrier, yeah, sorry. I don't drink this stuff, I don't know. Okay, spring natural mineral water, right? We have a predetermined idea of what the sequencing of those letters mean, right? And any one of you guys can come and you could read this and gather the meaning that was intended by the person who made this before ever even seeing it, right? Because we have this predetermined idea of what's going on. So it is with the codes for amino acids coding for proteins, for how DNA, there's a predetermined language that is used by the DNA to code for proteins. It's absolutely fascinating. You have a language that's the language is meaningless unless it's understood by the sender and the receiver. This process is the most, get this, this process is the most complex, densely packed, and efficient system for storing and retrieving information in the known universe.
Where are you?
This process is the most complex, densely packed, and efficient system of storing and retrieving information in the known universe. It is error correcting, error detecting, self-replicating, and it's digital. The complex specified information always comes from an intelligent source. This is, again, part of our normal, everyday experience. So the question is, how did life arise from non-living chemicals? So if this is so incredibly strong, this idea, again, highly specified, highly complex. You have a strong, strong, strong basis for making the inference to design. So there are three naturalistic theories for how chemical evolution could have happened. Either by chance, by prebiotic natural selection, or biochemical predestination. So let's look at each of those. So the naturalist, the person who doesn't believe in design, has three options. Either it's chance, or it's natural selection, but before life, prebiotic natural selection, or it's biochemical predestination. Somehow the physics and chemistry determined that life would come to be the way it is. So first, let's look at chance. Life was the product of chance. So again, the idea of chance is really something that we don't see in the universe, and that chance itself doesn't have a causal power. You can't say something is caused by chance. It's not a causal thing. Randomness doesn't actually exist in the universe. If I flip a coin in a vacuum under the same conditions, it will always yield the same results. The probability of getting the right sequence of amino acids from a functional protein is, again, extremely small. So the smallest proteins out there are made up of over 150 amino acids. Okay, so let's think about that. If, the average protein is 300 to 400 amino acids long, and the order of the amino acids are sequence specific, just like the orders of the letters on this page. In order for you to gather meaning from this page, the letters on the page are sequence specific, right? So there are 20 possible amino acids. So if you can think of the amino acids like the 26 letters in our alphabet, there's a lot of different possible arrangements for the letters in our alphabet, but it's only the right sequence that gives it meaning. If you don't have sequence, you don't have meaning. And so, is it possible that we could throw out Scrabble letters and get a few words? Yes, it's possible, right? And is it possible that we might even get something that's meaningful, right? Maybe even 2 or 3 words, right? But the probability, so let's think about this probability. So out of the possible if we were to just talk about the smallest of proteins, again, average proteins like 300 to 400 amino acids long. Smallest ones are 150. There are 20 different possible amino acids that you could choose from. You think of the probabilities for each one sequenced correctly. It's a probability of 1 in 20 times, not plus, but times 1 in 20, 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 150 times. So when you think about that, what that ends up being is 1 part in 10 to the negative 150th power. Which, when you see that, it doesn't look that big because you're not used to using exponents. I teach the rules of exponents in 8th grade math. And we have a whole thing on exponents. And I even have an exponent song about the rules for exponents. But exponents get very big very fast without you even realizing. Because every single, we say 1 in 10 to the 10th power, that's 1 with 10 zeros after it. All right, so think about that think about that in related to this. So 1 in 10 to the negative 150th power is extremely small. You also have additional probabilistic hurdles, such as the probability of functional folds to the number of possible sequences in the given length. That's a probability of 1 in 10 to the 74th power. Probability of each length being a peptide bond is 1 in 1 half times to the 150th power, which is 1 times 10 to the 45th power. Probability of each amino acid being left-handed. They've all got to be left-handed amino acids. If you get a right-handed one, the sequence falls apart. That's a 1 in 10 to the 45th power. And when you add up all the stuff, you end up with, or when you multiply it all out, you end up with 1 part in 10 to the negative 164th power. Which, when you study probability, anything with a probability of 10 to the 50th power is technically absurd. Scientifically, it's absurd. And so, again, we don't really experience, we don't use these numbers enough to be familiar with exactly how big 1 part in 10 to the negative 160th power is, how small that number is. But consider this, there's 10 to the 16th second since the Big Bang 15 to 20 billion years ago. There's only 10 to the 80th elementary particles in the entire universe. And there are only 1 part in 10 to the 139 possible events since the beginning of the universe. So the idea of life coming into existence is so small that most scientists do not even buy this. Most scientists are not, chance is not even an option. Anybody who says it's by chance really doesn't know what they're talking about. No scientist today is proposing chance. They're looking for additional options. Well, again, you've got, well, the other thing, so let's say you beat the odds and you get the right sequence for just a small protein. What do you have? A small protein. You don't have life, because life is made up of hundreds and hundreds of proteins, right? And not only do you have to have, here's where it gets really crazy, because you have to have, how do you get proteins? Well, amino acids, but where does it come from in life? You need DNA, right? So you also have to think about the probability of DNA happening, but not only that, in order to read DNA, you need proteins, right? So DNA can't assemble a protein unless it has proteins to read the DNA. And so, but you can't get a protein. It's one of those, you need everything all at once. It's one of those examples of irreducible complexity. You can't reduce the complexity of life, past a certain point without not having life. And, just having one protein is extremely improbable, but that's just one protein. You got lots and lots and lots of proteins that you're going to need for life, and you're going to need DNA. You're going to need it all there, all at once, in order for life to exist. So, looking at the probability, in the video, Stephen Meyer talks about Waco Willie, and he's one of those guys where every hand he gets is a winner. Every hand, it's straight flush, royal flush, 4 aces, every time, And you complain, say, hey, you're cheating, right? And Waco says, hey, your cards, you might have 4 of hearts, a 10 of diamonds, 10 of hearts, a 4 spade, or whatever. Your random assemblage of cards is just as improbable as mine. Is he right? Because each card has a 1 in 52 chance, right? So the royal flush has the same probability as the specific card that you have. What's the difference?
His is a sequence that wins.
His is a sequence that we have predetermined prior to the game that particular sequence wins the game, right? My sequence, though it's just as probable as his sequence, doesn't win. It's not a meaningful sequence. You guys get that? That's actually kind of like a big point, because again it reinforces this idea of specified complexity. And so, yeah, chance is not a good hypothesis. The second hypothesis is called prebiotic natural selection. Anytime somebody talks about natural selection, when it relates to the origin of the universe, or origin of life, is really kind of talking nonsense at this point. Because what is natural selection? Change through mutation, and a mutation results in something being more, it's selected for its, it's an advantage. It has a adaptive advantage, and so it's selected naturally. The ones that don't have the advantage they die out, right? So what's wrong with prebiotic natural selection? There's nothing to select. There's no life, because you're talking about natural selection before life. That's absurd. So the other option is this idea of biochemical predestination. And as it turns out, one of the primary authors of this biochemical predestination was a guy by the name of Dean Kenyon, who wrote textbooks for Ivy League schools on this idea of biochemical predestination. It was actually, he was confronted with this idea of how do you have proteins without DNA and DNA without proteins by one of his students that caused him to doubt his own theory. And now he's one of the major proponents of intelligent design. But at his university, he was actually talked about in that Expelled movie. In his university, he was essentially went from a tenured staff, this old guy been around for forever, to essentially a lab assistant. Again, there's this strong persecution of people who believe in intelligent design among biologists in the university. Prebiotic natural selection. Biochemical predestination. So this is where most scientists stand, even though they don't really have a clear explanation of how it works. And you saw that in the video when they were interviewing all the scientists, and they were saying on the backs of crystals and stuff like that. There really is no theory, but again, it's the naturalism that prevents them from ever making the inference to design. Because they're committed to naturalistic causes, because they've woven that into the very definition of science itself. So,
Stanley Miller found that out the hard way.
yeah. So, basically what Stanley Miller did is he found an amino acid. And some people think that is like, oh, we found an amino acid by doing conditions in life that weren't even present at the original, Earth. But even if you have an amino acid, it's the sequencing of the amino acid that's the hardest thing to explain. You need to have the right sequence in order to have a protein. But then even if you get a protein, all you have is one protein. So, so anyways.
Proteins make a human?
It'd be a lot. I don't know. There's a lot that make up a cell, and then there's a lot of cells that make up a human. So it'd be a lot. So guys, biochemical predestination, the problem, so most people say that life was caused by chemical attraction and the laws of physics. That it was some kind of combination of a chance arrangement with the natural physical forces involved and chemical attractions, the laws of physics. So the problem is that the sequencing in DNA and among the amino acids is not ordered by chemistry. It's predetermined. There is no chemical. There is some chemical. Like if you have an A, you have to have a T after it. But there's no chemical reason for why the A, C, T, and G as it is in the DNA is. Each one of them could have been, a different way, right? Chemistry does not determine the sequencing of the nucleotide bases, nor does it determine the sequencing of the amino acids. So it's not a good explanation for how life began. Basically, trying to use chemistry to explain the origin of information in DNA, it's like trying to explain. You guys ever played with the magnetic letters? It's like trying to explain away the message. You ever walking downstairs and then there's a message written in magnetic letters, right? So, using physics and chemistry to try to explain the sequencing of the nucleotide bases or the amino acids is like trying to use physics and chemistry to explain why the magnet sticks to the board, but doesn't say anything about the arrangement, the sequencing of the thing that is really the most important thing. And again, life is all about the sequencing of the arrangement. Just like the letters on this page, the meaning the essential attribute of the meaning of the page that you're looking at is the sequencing of the letters. So it is with life, in the sequencing of the amino acids and proteins. So, okay, Next one. Explain why proponents of the theory of intelligent design believe that design reasoning can be empirically tested and therefore is a scientific theory. Explain how we might use the principles of intelligent design to infer as part of our normal day experience. So again, intelligent design is a scientific inquiry because we have access to the effects of human intelligence. We can go out and test the theory that complex specified information is always the product of an intelligent agent. We can go out and look, you know, the letters on this page. If you can show me how something like this would occur naturally in a natural world setting, then you would disprove intelligent design. But we go out and we prove it every day. We make design inferences every single day. It's part of our normal everyday experience. Every day. We do it all the time without even realizing it. We make this inference. Intelligent design is known. So we have wide, okay, so first off, wait, hold on, where am I going? I'm skipping ahead. This theory could be falsified by examples of specified information that are known to be caused by natural causes. Information that is known to be caused by natural causes. We know from our observation that intelligence design is capable of producing information. And we should always invoke causes that are known to produce the effect in question. Intelligence is always inferred as the source of information. This is part of, again, a normal, repeatable, testable experience. It's not an argument from ignorance. This is not a God of the gaps argument. It's not like, I don't know how this happened, therefore God did it. It's, no, this is part of our normal everyday experience. We make these inferences all the time. Next thing is, in summary, we have a striking appearance of design. We have widespread acknowledgement that the current naturalistic theories are inadequate. Intelligence is known to be able to produce the effect in question, namely information. Intelligence is known as the ability to, as being able to produce information. The principles of design inferences are tested, falsifiable, predictable, repeatable, and part of our normal everyday experience. Why not infer intelligence since it is best known, is the best known cause to explain the effect in question? Why not? I mean, all those things are pretty significant things. We have widespread acknowledgement that we don't know the answer to this question. We know that intelligent design is able to produce the effect in question, that intelligence can produce information. Why don't we go there? Why doesn't the mainstream scientific world, why aren't they allowing themselves to go in that direction? Why not?
The assumption is their conclusion.
It goes back to week 4. Or was it week 5? It was week 5. Naturalism. Naturalism, they're committed to a naturalistic worldview. This methodological naturalism, which you guys did a whole video on. So you want to talk about in your video to explain why naturalism might unjustifiably rule out design by arbitrarily limiting the conclusions that science is able to come to. So again, this debate is partly about evidence, but it's also about presuppositions that people bring to the table about what constitutes as actual science. Under methodological naturalism, it's basically the methodology for doing science that limits the explanations to material processes only. It forbids the experimenter from invoking non-naturalistic causes. It says if you want to be scientific, you must infer natural causes. This was adopted by the mainstream science, and for the naturalists, this is woven into the very definition of science. Non-naturalistic explanations are, by definition, unscientific. And so, when assumed, it arbitrarily reduces the number of possible options. Again, we talked about it before, that it's like the detective who says you can't implicate a white man. We really, to be intellectually honest, we need to look at the evidence before we before it even has a chance to see, we need to look at the evidence to rule out possible explanation. With methodological naturalism, design is ruled out a priori before the evidence has a chance to speak. So don't assume that the scientists are always objective and that they don't have biases. They are just as committed to their worldview as we are. And everyone has biases. The problem is when science addresses the question of origins, you're being denied access to information that would enable you to make an educated decision. And that's what's so unfortunate about this topic is you aren't allowed to teach both sides of the argument. It's a one-sided thing. The fundamental obligation of the scientist is to seek out the best explanation, and if the naturalist definition of science keeps us from finding truth or the explanation that is most likely to be true, then it is time to change their definition of science. Most important rule is that you follow the evidence. So, are there any questions related to intelligent design?
Yeah, one if no one else has one. We're running out of time. On the previous page you said this theory could be falsified.
Yes.
By example, this is something that you keep running into over and over again when you deal with science. If it can't be falsified, it is not scientific. So can you give us an example of how the theory could be falsified? How would you falsify intelligent design? And if you could do that, then it would be scientific.
If you could find some type of example of complex well, first off, falsifiability is not necessarily
What does that mean? Prove false?
Yeah, prove false. I don't know that that's necessarily needed for something to be scientific, but in this case, you could falsify intelligent design by providing an example of complex specified information that is not the product of an intelligent source. If you could do that, then this theory would fall apart. If you could go out and find examples, and I mean there are, you are unlimited to your number of possible examples. You could look anywhere and everywhere. If you could find anything where you have a high degree of complex specificity, then when the cause is known to be by undirected natural forces, that would refute the idea of this argument for intelligence. Again, there's another argument which we didn't even talk about. It's called irreducible complexity, which is a completely different thing, which basically says the amount of, in order for you to have a functional thing, you have to have a certain number of parts, and you can't reduce the number of parts past a certain point without losing function of the thing entirely. That's a whole other thing that I wish I had time to talk about specified complexity. I wish I had more time to talk about this. But this is the most important one, because this is this idea that information is connected to mind. Wherever you have information, it's the product of mind. You have information in DNA, therefore it's the product of mind. You have complex specificity in the origin of the universe. You have mind. And it goes back to the end of our lecture last week. We talked about how you've got some either-or questions, and how you answer those either-or questions will put you into certain buckets. If you say the question of does God exist, yes or no? If you say no, then you're an atheist. If you say yes, you're basically everybody else. Pantheist, deist, theist. Once you say, is God one with the universe or separate from the universe? If you say he's one with the universe, you're a pantheist. If you say he's separate, you're either a theist or a deist. And the whole argument last week was to show that the universe, that it would get you, last week's argument would get you to deism and theism. The idea of God being independent of the universe and there needing to be this first cause outside of the universe. It's independent from the material world. And so that would throw away pantheism, which believes that all is one and one is God. So now we have theism and deism. Deism is the belief that God exists, but he's standoffish. He's not active. He created the universe and just let it go. This is an example of God coming into creation at a certain point in time and creating life. And there's more to this, because we could talk about I don't know, I wish again, there's so much stuff to cover in this 14 weeks. It's like you really need like 2 classes. But there's a whole thing on the Cambrian explosion where you have these different episodes where life is exploding on in the geologic column. Most notably is the Cambrian explosion, and that would be another example of God coming into the universe and acting and inducing information into the biosphere. And so if in this intelligent design argument goes, then you're really left with theism. If it works, you're left with a God that's working within the universe. And so it really narrows down where your worldviews and worldview options. So I've got 20 minutes, and I need to decide what I'm going to show you. Maybe next week I'll have to... What are we doing next week? Next week we're doing edit assignments.
Ontological argument.
The ontological... Okay, so maybe what we'll do is next week I'll show you a little bit more of the video. I want you to see... Guys, we might go over a little bit, but that's hopefully not too much. Where does the evidence lead? Okay.
By the 1960s, scientists had determined that even simple cells are made of thousands of different types of proteins, and the function of these molecules derives from their highly complex three-dimensional shapes. The irregular shapes of some proteins allow them to catalyze or trigger chemical reactions because of the hand-and-glove fit that they have with other molecules in the cell, while other protein molecules form interlocking structural components.
The individual parts of a bacterial motor, like this ring structure, are each made of either a single protein molecule or an assembly of proteins fitted together into a specific shape. These proteins are, in turn, made of smaller chemical units called amino acids that are linked together in long chains.
There is a very great degree of intricacy of architecture down in the cell units in these protein-forming amino acids.
In nature, 20 different types of amino acids are used to construct protein chains. Biologists have compared them to the 26 letters of the English alphabet.
Alphabetic letters can be arranged in a huge number of possible combinations, and it's the sequential arrangement of the letters that determines whether you have meaningful words and sentences. If the letters are arranged correctly, you'll get meaningful text. But if they're not arranged correctly, you'll get gibberish. And the same principle applies for amino acids and proteins.
There are at least 30,000 distinct types of proteins, each made of a different combination of the same 20 amino acids. They are arranged, like letters, to form chains, often hundreds of units long. If the amino acids are sequenced correctly, then the chain will fold into a functioning protein.
Proteins are arranged with their amino acids in such a way that the amino acids collapse on each other into an architecture that is pre-programmed by the order of the amino acids. It folds into a certain structure, and that structure can do a certain function. So all proteins in the cell have a certain three-dimensional pattern that's based on the arrangement of amino acids in the chain.
This arrangement is critical, for if the amino acids are incorrectly sequenced, a useless chain forms, and instead of folding into a protein, it will be destroyed in the cell.
Proteins, like written languages or computer codes, have a high degree of specificity. The function of the whole depends upon the precise arrangement of the individual parts.
But what produces the precise sequencing of amino acids that gives rise to the specific shapes and functions of proteins? During the 1950s and 60s, discoveries about protein structure forced biologists to confront this mystery. Dean Kenyon believed he could solve it. In his book Biochemical Predestination, Kenyon and his co-author Gary Steinman proposed an intriguing theory. Kenyon wrote, "Life might have been biochemically predestined by the properties of attraction that exist between its chemical parts, particularly between amino acids in proteins."
At the time that biochemical predestination came out, I and my co-author were totally convinced that we had the scientific explanation for origins.
Kenyon proposed that the chemical properties of the amino acids caused them to be attracted to each other, forming the long chains that became the first proteins, the most important components in the living cell. And this meant that life was effectively inevitable, predestined by nothing more than chemistry.
Many scientists embraced Kenyon's ideas, and over the next 20 years, Biochemical Predestination became a best-selling text on the theory of chemical evolution. Yet 5 years after the book's publication, Kenyon quietly began to doubt the plausibility of his own theory.
It was during that whole period of time that my doubts about certain aspects of the evolutionary account became apparent. When coming into contact with a powerful counter-argument given to me by one of my students, and I could not refute that counter-argument.
Kenyon was challenged to explain how the first proteins could have been assembled without the help of genetic instructions. In living cells today, chains of amino acids are not formed directly by forces of attraction between their parts, the scenario Kenyon envisioned on the early Earth. Instead, another large molecule within the cell stores instructions for sequencing the amino acids in proteins. It is called DNA.
Initially, Kenyon believed that proteins could have formed directly from amino acids without any DNA assembly instructions. And that's why so many scientists were excited about his theory. But the more he and others learned about the properties of amino acids and proteins, the more he began to doubt that proteins could self-assemble without DNA.
In DNA, Kenyon encountered a molecule with a property he could not explain through natural processes. For locked securely within its double helix structure is a wealth of information in the form of precisely sequenced chemicals that scientists represent with the letters A, C, T, and G. In a written language, information is communicated by a precise arrangement of letters. In the same way, the instructions necessary to assemble amino acids into proteins are conveyed by the sequences of chemicals arranged along the spine of the DNA. This chemical code has been called the language of life, and it is the most densely packed and elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe.
Like other scientists working on the origin of life, Kenyon realized he had two choices. Either he had to explain where these genetic assembly instructions came from, or he had to explain how proteins could have arisen directly from amino acids without DNA in the primordial oceans. And in the end, he realized he could do neither.
It's an enormous problem how you could get together in one tiny submicroscopic volume of the primitive ocean all of the hundreds of different molecular components you would need in order for a self-replicating cycle to be established. And so my doubts about whether amino acids could order themselves into meaningful biological sequences on their own without pre-existing genetic material being present just reached, I guess for me, the intellectual breaking point sometime near the end of the decade of the 70s.
As Kenyon reevaluated his theory, new biochemical discoveries further weakened his conviction that amino acids could have organized themselves into proteins.
The more I conducted my own studies, including a period of time at NASA Ames Research Center, the more it became apparent that there were multiple difficulties with the chemical evolution account. And further experimental work showed that amino acids do not have the ability to order themselves into any biologically meaningful sequences.
Faced with mounting difficulties in his own theory and a growing body of scientific data about the importance of DNA, Kenyon was forced to confront the absolute necessity of genetic information.
The more I thought about the alternative that was being presented in the criticism and the enormous problem that all of us who worked on this field had neglected to address, the problem of the origin of genetic information itself, then I really had to reassess my whole position regarding origins.
For Dean Kenyon, a new question became the focus of his search for life's origin. What was the source of the biological information in DNA?
If one could get at the origin of the messages, the encoded messages within the living machinery, then you would really be on to something far more intellectually satisfying than this chemical evolution theory.
Yet Kenyon realized that he faced a narrowing set of options. By the 1970s, most researchers had rejected the idea that the information necessary to build the first cell originated by chance alone. To understand why, consider the difficulty of generating just 2 lines of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters onto a tabletop. Then considered that the specific genetic instructions required to build the proteins in even the simplest one-celled organism would fill hundreds of pages of printed text.
Of course, serious origin of life biologists did not believe that life had arisen by chance alone. Instead, they envisioned natural selection acting on random variations among chemicals to produce the first life. But there was a problem with this proposal.
By definition, natural selection could not have functioned before the existence of the first living cell. For it can only act upon organisms capable of replicating themselves, cells equipped with DNA that pass on their genetic changes to future generations.
Without DNA, there is no self-replication. But without self-replication, there is no natural selection. So you can't use natural selection to explain the origin of DNA without assuming the existence of the very thing you're trying to explain.
Chance, natural selection, and his own theory of self-organization had all failed to explain the origin of genetic information. Now Kenyon saw only one alternative.
We have not the slightest chance of a chemical evolutionary origin for even the simplest of cells. So the concept of the intelligent design of life was immensely attractive to me and made a great deal of sense, as it very closely matched the multiple discoveries in molecular biology.
In the years since Kenyon's rejection of chemical evolution, science has revealed the details of an entire system of information processing that bears the hallmarks of intelligent design. With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing. And it's exactly this new realm of molecular genetics where we see the most compelling evidence of design on the Earth.
When I look at molecular machines or the incredibly complex process by which cells divide, I want to ask, is it possible that these things had an intelligence behind them, that there was a plan or a purpose to this structure? Science ought to be a search for the truth about the world. Now, we shouldn't prejudge what might be true. We shouldn't say, I don't like that explanation, so I'm going to put it to one side. Rather, when we come to a puzzle in nature, we ought to bring to that puzzle every possible cause that might explain it. One of the problems I have with evolutionary theory is it artificially rules out a kind of cause even before the evidence has a chance to speak. And the cause that's ruled out is intelligence.
Since the late 19th century, since the time of Darwin, in fact, in part because of Darwin's writing in The Origin of Species, scientists came to accept a convention, a definition of science that excluded the possibility of design as a scientific explanation. And that convention has a name. It's called methodological naturalism. And it just means that if you're going to be scientific, you must limit yourself to explanations that invoke only natural causes. You can't invoke intelligence as a cause. And yet, curiously, we make inferences to intelligence all the time. It's part of our ordinary reasoning to recognize the effects of intelligence.
Consider, for example, these hieroglyphic messages carved upon the ruins of Egyptian monuments. no one would attribute the shapes and arrangements of these symbols to natural causes like sandstorms or erosion. Instead, we recognize them as the work of ancient scribes, intelligent human agents. Similar reasoning leads us to conclude that the mysterious stone figures on the shores of Easter Island were not formed by the actions of wind and water over great periods of time. Nor do we presume that plants could grow into these familiar shapes without some manner of intelligent guidance.
Of course, we make these inferences all the time, and we know they're correct. But the question is, on what basis do we make these inferences? What are the features that enable us to recognize intelligence?
Recently, in a book titled The Design Inference, mathematician William Dembski has made an important breakthrough in understanding design reasoning. Dembski has identified the specific features of artifacts that cause us to recognize prior intelligent activity.
I came to this by trying to look at how do we reason about design? What are the logical moves that we have to go through in order to come to a conclusion of design? So what I'm trying to do is to establish reliable, empirical, scientifically rigorous criteria for deciding whether something is in fact designed. So I was looking at the logic of it. And what I found was you need improbability and you need specification, the right sort of pattern, these objective patterns.
According to Dembski, human beings correctly detect the activity of intelligence whenever they observe a highly improbable object or event that also matches a recognizable pattern. Just such a pattern is found in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
If you travel through the West, you'll see lots of different shapes on mountainsides, most of which mean nothing at all. They're just rocks strewn in various patterns. But what you don't see are the faces of Lincoln, Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and George Washington on mountainsides. The only place you see that is in South Dakota. And the reason it's there is because a sculptor, an eccentric sculptor, decided that he wanted to honor these presidents by spending the larger part of his life chiseling their faces in the side of that mountain. That pattern is improbable. A random hillside is also improbable, but a random hillside doesn't specify anything. We do know, though, that there were 4 guys who were presidents of the United States who had particular patterns with their faces, and those patterns on the mountainside in South Dakota match faces elsewhere.
If I look up and see the faces, I immediately recognize that they match the faces of the 4 presidents that are known from money or portraits at the National Gallery or paintings and books. And so I realized when I look at Mount Rushmore, we have not only a highly improbable configuration of rock, but one which matches an independently given pattern that reliably indicates intelligence.
So we have a small probability, specification, it's design.
On a seashore, another improbable pattern etched into the earth illustrates how we detect design. No one would infer that this message was written by the movement of the tides. Instead, because of the characteristics of this pattern, we identify the words as the products of intelligence.
That improbable arrangement also conforms to an independently given pattern, namely the shapes of the letters that we recognize from English alphabet and the words that we know from English vocabulary. And so it's the improbability of the arrangement plus the fact that it conforms to an independently given pattern that triggers the awareness of design.
This illustration suggests that William Dembski's criteria for design detection, small probability and specification, are essentially equivalent to information. The type of information present not only in pictures, written texts, and numeric sequences, but also encoded in software and radio signals. The ability to detect information in electromagnetic transmissions has made possible a unique search for intelligence. For more than 3 decades, astronomers involved in SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, have monitored radio signals from outer space in an attempt to find information-rich patterns. Typically, radio telescopes receive either random noise or simple repetitive signals produced naturally by stars, galaxies, and other celestial objects. But astronomers recognized that if they ever identified an information-bearing signal, it would confirm the existence of intelligent life beyond the Earth. Some have speculated that an extraterrestrial civilization might have attempted to communicate by transmitting messages in the universal language of mathematics, perhaps through a recognizable pattern like a series of prime numbers.
You're not going to get that by chance. So you need complexity or improbability, lots of prime numbers, and you also need a pattern. And it has to be the right sort of pattern. It's not a pattern that you're imposing. It's a pattern that's there objectively.
To date, SETI research has failed to detect any pattern or information that would indicate intelligence in a distant galaxy. But in another universe, much closer to home, scientists have discovered a wealth of information within the nucleus of the living cell.
DNA has a structure that is ideal for carrying information. In the A's, T's, C's, and G's, the bases of the double helix of DNA, is the potential for storing a tremendous amount of information.
There is, in fact, no entity in the known universe that stores and processes more information more efficiently than the DNA molecule. A full complement of human DNA has 3 billion individual characters. Analysis of the DNA molecule's coding regions show that its chemical characters have a specific arrangement that allows them to convey detailed instructions or information, much like letters in a meaningful sentence or binary digits in a computer code.
Bill Gates has said that DNA is like a computer program, only much more complex than any we've been able to devise. And if you reflect on that even for a minute, it's a highly suggestive observation, because we know that Bill Gates does not employ wind and erosion or random number generators to generate his software. Instead, he employs intelligent engineers, software engineers. And so everything we know in our experience suggests that information-rich systems arise from intelligent design. But what do we make of the fact that there is information in life, in every living cell of every living organism? That's the fundamental mystery. Where does that information come from? And the nucleotide base.
For the past 15 years, philosopher and scientist Stephen Meyer has worked to answer this question. Meyer has developed an argument to demonstrate that intelligent design provides the best explanation for the origin of information necessary to build the first living cell.
The information that the DNA molecule holds. It's part of our knowledge base that intelligent agents can produce information-rich systems. So the argument is not based on what we don't know, but it's based on what we do know about the cause and effect structure of the world. We know at present there is no naturalistic explanation, no natural cause that produces information. Not natural selection, not self-organizational processes, not pure chance. But we do know of a cause which is capable of producing information, and that is intelligence. So when people infer design from the presence of information in DNA, they're effectively making what's called in the historical sciences an inference to the best explanation. So when we find an information-rich system in the cell, in the DNA molecule specifically, we can infer that an intelligence played a role in the origin of that system, even if we weren't there to observe the system coming into existence.
Meyer's work on the origin of genetic information is now part of a comprehensive scientific case for design that grew out of a meeting of scientists and philosophers on the central coast of California in 1993. Their objective was to reassess an idea that had dominated biology for more than a century. In the process, they gave birth to a theory that has become known as intelligent design.
Hit the lights. So if you want to know what this video is, I used to have a link, but the link got messed up. I'll try to find a new link. It's called Unlocking the Mystery of Life. They have different versions of it. This was kind of made a long time ago, before that Supreme Court case, Dover versus Pennsylvania, where basically they were teaching intelligent design in schools, and then there was a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that intelligent design is unscientific and religious, and therefore it can't be taught in a scientific classroom. And so now you have the courts telling us what science can teach, and so this was actually designed to be, presented in public schools. So you'll never see the word God. You'll never see, it's a really good video. So it's probably one of the best apologetic videos ever made, I would say. This particular Unlocking the Mystery of Life. So, all right. What? You found it?
So you could say that, I might butcher this question, but you could say that people who are proponents of intelligent design believe in God. But you can't say that all proponents of intelligent design that believe in God are Christian.
Right. Well, and you would say that, not necessarily. A person who believes that aliens created us would have no problem with intelligent design.
So then what I said is right. They don't all have to.
They don't. Okay, maybe I misunderstood you. Yeah. Yes. They don't all have to believe. They don't have to believe in God. They just believe that the source for life was mind, not immaterial or undirected natural forces. All right. Let's pray. Father God, I just thank you for today. God, I just pray for the making of this video, that they do a good job and the slides come out good. And God, I just pray that this could all be used for your kingdom and your glory. We love you so much. We just pray that you would help us to seek first your kingdom and your righteousness, God. We pray that we just love you, God. We just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.